The Visiting Artist program, funded by PAFA's graduate program, brings an outstanding roster of local, national, and international artists to PAFA each semester for lectures, critiques, and workshops. The program exposes students and the public to a range of artistic approaches and fosters discussion about contemporary art and ideas. This afternoon, we are pleased to have Eloisa Guanlao joining us. Eloisa was born in the Philippines. Her experiences as an immigrant and pseudo-nomadic scholar artist influence her versatile art practice and critical inquiries. Eloisa's interests in the natural world, history, art, languages, and literature began at an early age. This multifaceted passion was nurtured at the Los Angeles High School for the Arts in California, cultivated with a liberal arts education at Carleton College in Minnesota, and further developed at the University of New Mexico, where she received her MFA in studio art. Because Eloisa considers art making a social and cultural endeavor, she pursues projects that are research intensive and relevant to current issues. A trained teacher and lifelong scholar, Eloisa has taught at secondary schools and universities in Hawaii, California, Maryland, and Alabama, where students and colleagues appreciate her dedication to interdisciplinary learning and pedagogy. Eloisa practices and teaches art in California. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Eloisa, and you may begin sharing your screen.
Thank you, Christy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. And so to begin, I wanted to share so it will go to YouTube and I'll put it on the full screen mode. And it's about 2 minutes long. And I want to share this current celebration that just occurred in September. So I'll just pause it and put it on full screen mode.
Okay, we can't see your screen yet.
Oh, you can't. Maybe I can't put it on full screen mode. Let me go back. Oh, I know what happened. Let's do this again. All right, take two, everyone. Go into your inner self. Okay, and can you see this now?
Yes, we see your presentation now.
Okay, so it's in presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, take two. Yay. Can you see the YouTube?
It is circling.
Okay.
But yes, so the screen's up. Okay.
we are here on the East. Okay, so I'm back on. So you guys don't see the YouTube anymore, right? Okay,
Correct.
great.
Yes,
All right.
but we do see your presentation speaker notes. So.
Oh, you do? All right, let me switch again. Hold on. I think I have the wrong, okay. And I think it's this one. Are we good?
Yes.
No more, okay, presentation speaker notes. Okay, which I have none. Okay. All right, so now you see some 19th century, I just want to double check.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things I wanted to start with that. So I'm part of that group. It's a Polynesian halau. So halau in Hawaiian roughly translates to school, group, also family. And one of the things that I like to start off with is to share what brings me joy. And so the thing that brings me joy is dancing, and also especially dancing ancient forms of Hawaiian and Tahitian would be my jams are oteas. They're called oteas in Tahitian, and kahikos in Hawaiian. And one of the things that I really love about dancing is that when the Puritan colonial powers went to Hawaii and Tahiti, they basically covered up all the people who live in these hot climates and told them God doesn't want to see their skin, and they shouldn't be dancing these mating dances and celebrating their gods. Okay, so one of the things I like to celebrate is to just be part of that history of resistance, you know? So a lot of what the practitioners of these dances did is they hid it. So the dancing was hid underground. And so now what I like is to just flaunt it, you know, to flaunt my body, to flaunt the bodies and not have shame with your body. Like my halau, we all have different body types and we're not embarrassed about it. There is no shame in being human and having, you know, different phenotypes, different skin colors, different orientations. So that's why I want to share that and celebrate it. And also to say that because though this kind of images, and also my cat will be coming momentarily, and like these positive body image also exists within, you know, this kind of context. So over the weekend, my daughters and I have two young daughters, we were at a used bookstore, and I have to get my cat out. And I found the Stereograph, which jarred me, which to me is very traumatizing, you know? So I do art, not because it's like my art practice, it shocks people. It's not joyful to me. To me, it's a necessity. And I tell my partner all the time, I need to be lobotomized because it's my way of processing through things like this, you know, historical trauma and images that exist like this. Like I ask myself, why do these images exist and how do they exist? And they have a purpose, you know, and so I'll go into that. But before, we'll go back to this image, basically. So there are three main threads that my cat really wants to get into the screen. So there are three main threads that stitch my art practice together. So that would be forced and voluntary migration, colonialism, and technological dependence. And since I was 15, these are the same themes that have run through my artwork, because usually all three are very much intertwined. So I'll kind of we'll go through like my thinking and the way that I do my art practice. So first, there's the issue of forced and voluntary migration. So I like to look at us as a species in terms of, are we flora or fauna? We're definitely fauna. And as fauna, as Homo not so sapiens, we have a horrible, terrible track record as a species. So ever since we left Africa and we went into Australia, New Zealand, or the Americas, we've caused massive extinctions, basically. So we just basically reduce biodiversity as a species. And so that's something that I like to track and look at. And so part of one of the topics of that forced and voluntary migration that I was looking at is a show that I was invited to in Florida. It was called Anthropocene, which is the epoch that we live in now, which is humans that control the way that climate is, going, and also weather patterns and biodiversity. And so this one, this piece is entitled Holo My Pele, which translates to the journey of Pele. And I'm doing a series called Talking Story. So Talking Story in Hawaiian slang means like hanging out, shooting the shit, just kind of like hanging out with your friends. And so the stories that I'm telling starts with Holo My Pele. And so with this piece, I'm looking at disappearing island homes, which is happening right now, disappearing lakes. So here, let's see, the islands that I have carved out are Micronesia, Solomon, Antarctica, and Palau. And the lakes that are disappearing are Popo, Owens Lake, Chad, Nigeria, and Oromia. And so what I did is I raised a canoe up in these giant paddle boards to create like an architectonic place where I could dance around it and also talk about these island homes and these lakes disappearing. And in terms of material, the paddles are made out of bamboo. And also the cloth is made out of piña cloth, which is the national cloth of the Philippines. And what's ironic about that in terms of migration is the piña cloth is made out of pineapples. And that's what these traditional dresses, so-called Tagalog dresses, and barongs are made in the Philippines, but pineapple is originally from South America. So a lot of these cultural objects and material cultures that we hold dear and true to us, like potatoes in Ireland or whatever, are all from all over the world, so to look at origins or where things came from and hold on to that, like nationalism and all that, it seems very silly to me, because we're always like migrating and exchanging ideas. So for 4 years, almost 4 years, my partner and I lived in Hawaii, and I was very much immersed in that culture. I was part of a halau. And so that's where the allegory of Pele comes in, and also my experience there with the Hawaiian secessionist movement, which very much influenced me. And one of two of my major influencers are Hans Hawk and David Hammonds, because of the minimalism they practice. So one of the things that the minimalists like Donald Judd brought in, and also Hawk and Hammonds brought in, is this idea of phenomenology, that we are not given meaning all to ourselves, that meaning comes from the outside. So what they did is they looked at institutions, like where does meaning come from, right? So with Hans Hawk, what he did in one of the biennales in Venice is he tore up the German pavilion to show that the roots of German racism, comes from the ground, from this idea of like when Hitler came to power, Germania is what Germany was called. And then here's the entrance to the German pavilion, Hitler going in, right? So the idea of consciousness, the German consciousness, comes from, the outside. You're not born thinking that Jews are the plague of the land. Someone gave you that idea. The schools gave you that idea. And also David Hammonds, awesome artist. I love him, where he really looks at audience participation. It's like the audience is needed for completion and meaning, and it's all about time and reception, right? And your perception at that moment. So like consciousness building. And also Kenyatta Hinkle, who basically looks at the residue of history and how it affects us in contemporary culture and our perspective, because context matters. So here's another view. And then I also shared the space with different artists who are looking at environmental issues and also issues of the Anthropocene. So part of the Talking Story series that I'm working on is also with a friend who is Indigenous, and we're looking at the forced migration of Native Americans from their ancestral home into the Oklahoma Territory. So here is a 19th century or early 20th century map calling it, Indian territory. So I'm looking at the expedition of Lewis and Clark, not from a sense of, scientific progression and advancement, but in terms of displacement of real people who actually live now. And so when I moved from Hawaii to grad school at the University of New Mexico, I knew the history of colonialism and settler colonialism in the United States. And I did not want to repeat the same kind of steal, take that anthropologists and scientists and also governments have practiced in indigenous lands, right? So they would go in, like ethnographers and anthropologists, they still do it. They go in, they record sacred ceremonies, they take stories, and then they take credit for it. So I was very much aware of that. So when I went to the University of New Mexico, I wanted to meet people, but I didn't want to reify those same kinds of colonialist practices. So this was a cross-cultural exchange that was funded for 3 years. It was a 3-year MFA program. UNM was very, very generous. And what I did is I built these 3 canoes alongside different youth from different pueblos in New Mexico. And I have to say, I say that artwork for me is not joyful, but in this instance, it was very much, it was not work. It was very joyful. It was a 3-year project with the different pueblos. This one that's pictured in particular, it was a 6th grade group. I was very intimate with them. I taught them hula. We talked about ancestors, we did video and photography, and then I showed them how to expand a canoe the traditional Hawaiian way with hot rocks and water. And so the nice thing about this project was that I really got to know the community. They invited me into their homes, into ceremonies, and I was very touched. And so this is the kind of art practice that I have to say I enjoy, that also brings a lot of also positive feedback from a lot of people. And then I brought this program to LA schools also, and to after school recreation centers. So the one on the lower right, they're painting like a DNA strand, and also so I also did a video of them making up their own poems, and then I show them how to use a camera. And because New Mexico used to be underwater, but now it's a desert, I was trying to figure out, how do I bring a canoe into the desert? So I outfitted one with wheels. So this one has wheels, and they are wheels for wheelchairs. So that you could actually maneuver them like into wheelchairs. And then 3 canoes are seaworthy. So you could see it in one of the pueblos over there, all the kids in the water, and then they're going in and, trying out their seaworthiness. And then a really, really important part of my artwork is material consideration. What do materials mean, right? Why is it that I'm using the material that I'm using? Why am I painting? Why am I using fabric? Why am I using this? And so for this one, it's called Haiyan. Haiyan was one of the typhoons that destroyed a lot of the Philippines. And so I wanted to talk about the fragility of island homes. So this is made out of rice paper, the kind that you go to a Vietnamese restaurant and then it's edible. And so I made this canoe, and actually this was taken at the Wildflower Trail in Huntsville, Alabama, one of my favorite trails to go to. Sunday, that's my church. I go to church on Sunday at the Wildflower Trail when I was living in Huntsville. And what I like about this material is that it is not an Egyptian pyramid. It's a material that will go away. It's ephemeral, and it doesn't impact the environment at all. I'm trying to work with materials that just go away, it's not this monolithic, very macho kind of material. So that's in terms of like materials right there. And then the second thread in my art investigation is colonialism. So when I was an undergrad, I lived in Paris every year after my freshman year because I realized I couldn't take the Minnesota winter. So my first year after that, I decided I'm going to go to Paris. I'm going to be a French major. And there, that's where I was introduced to Edward Said and this idea of Orientalism, which is the idea and the vision of Europeans of painting the Orient as other, right? Or of painting them as over-sexualized, as ignorant, as backwards, right? And also, I interviewed a lot of Maghrebian women, which are women from Northwest Africa, and also their perspectives. And I interviewed them and then also videotaped them. And that really opened my eyes to this way of painting and representing someone else based off of your own bias. So that's something that I definitely look at. So now we go back to this image that I found over the weekend, which is a stereograph from either the early 20th century or the late 19th century. And what this elicits in me is one of the projects that I do with my students in photography is looking at the different aspects in which we approach art. Okay, so we have a whole discussion about it. And so what I'm showing you right now is a gelatin silver print by two of my students. And so any one of you guys who do photo, this is a black and white darkroom photographs, and it's the contact print. So what they did is they basically figured out how their camera works so that when they make a contact print, it produces images like this that look somewhat connected but are disjointed. Okay, so what brings on this this project is we have a discussion about the two general approaches to art. Okay, so this is a very general approach, which is that either you live in a bubble, an ivory tower, so art for art's sake, which is very Greenbergian. I'm sure some of you grad students probably are. Oh my God, Clement Greenberg, okay. And then, and then there's the other side of that, which is more Leo Steinberg, right? Or Rosalind Krauss, the expanded field, where art is, you know, takes into consideration of us as social animals. So basically, we're humans, we're social animals living in a social world with real world problems. And so we came up with this project. Basically, I asked my students to look at issues that are either important to them or is bothering them or they want to address it, and create an artwork based off of that. So it's definitely, you know, less the art for art's sake and more of that idea of, you know, real world dealings that we're dealing in the real world, basically. So some of the artists that we looked at, so we can talk about it, is of course Barbara Kruger, because for me, Kruger was a lot of these women and feminist practitioners are very important to me, and then I'll go into that more, is that because she highlights that relationship between image and text, right? So it's like a semiotic reading of art. So for her, the act of looking is gendered and constructed. So she shows that with text and also image. And because she sees looking as very much implicated in ideology and ideology making and meaning making. So for example, a photograph functions like a text because it's cropped, it's edited, it's controlled, and it's constructed like a woman. So I like all of these ideas where her material and the concept and also are married, you know, it makes a lot of sense. And so Kruger and also Martha Rossler, who practiced at the same time. So here what Martha Rossler does is she takes these magazine images that women during the 60s and 70s are bombarded with, ideas of like a woman's place is in the home, and she subverts that. How does she subvert that? Is she puts in images of the Vietnam War that was happening at that time and saying that she's bringing the war home, right? These two things are not separate. These soldiers come in, they have PTSD, they bring the war home. So we might think that we live in these discrete places, but oftentimes, it's very liminal. Like these things overlap and affect us. And so so what basically the Rossler and Kruger do is the synthetic proposition that our experiences affect us, so it's going to affect our art, right? It's not going to be like Jackson Pollock, who's godlike and tells people, I am God, I will give you meaning, and the meaning is self-contained, right? No, there's an audience coming in, there's things happening, there's war going on. And so Adrian Piper is another. So I'm just showing you the way that I think in terms of art practice and how I approach things. So Adrian Piper is another one of those women that have given me a lot of thought about art practice, and also just the way that identity is a performative act. We talk a lot about that but when I was in undergrad, that was kind of like not talked about at all. It's like very modernist. And then the whole French school was just kind of gaining ground. So with Adrian Piper, she was running in the crowds with like Sol LeWitt and all the conceptual artists. But what happened was she was trying to do conceptual art that's kind of like in almost like an ivory tower bubble. But then when the gallerists in New York saw that she was a Black woman, shows were denied her. So she was trying to do conceptual art, but what happened was her identity as a Black woman limited her art practice. So then she really started looking into, identity and where meaning comes from when someone is looking at you and looking at your phenotype. So again, two women artists who basically very much highlight how the site of oppression is embedded in popular culture and also in religion. When we reify and practice these kinds of images, they become consciousness. They become our own consciousness. So like, when you go to your whatever religion you practice or whatever mass media you consume, it becomes, embedded in your consciousness. And so with my photography students, we talk about media literacy all the time. How is this photograph manipulating you? How are these images manipulating you? What is the meaning that these images are trying to embed into culture? So we talk about the gaze a lot. So for me, the gaze is equal to representation, right? So what does the gaze, so Laura Mulvey and also Kate Linker, they both look at the way in which these dominant discourses and consciousness and meaning address spectators as gendered subjects. Right. So if you look at Hitchcock, the way that the camera angle is situated, the way that ads are constructed, basically what it's doing is the strategy is to control the narrative. So if you control the gaze, you control the representation, you're controlling perception. And we've heard that whole saying that perception is truth. So basically you're making up your truth. Right. And a lot of people are falling for this now. And we see that, right, with a bunch of misinformation that's going on and, oh my gosh, and deep fakes. So, media literacy is so important now more than ever because people are like falling for this crap, and you need to like know how to read these images and know that they're constructed by very, very failed humans. You know what I mean? Like we're just all humans making mistakes. So be able to read it, read that perception. And so Kate Linker, if you guys, I mean, Kate Linker is so awesome. She also does video, awesome artist, and also theorist. Is that what she does is she takes us away from this, the godlike monolith of the artist towards looking at culture, right? So nothing is essential, nothing is natural. It's all like socially constructed. So you can deconstruct it, right? You could tear it apart and see how it's constructed and be like, hole here, go away from me. And so Guerrilla Girls, I like to bring them up. They have some problematic stuff, but I'm showing the ones that are, pretty relevant at the time. And they're always fun for like freshmen if they've never been introduced to. So I highly, and what I like about them is, it's like propaganda, like fighting propaganda. So basically, I mean, that's what's happening in Facebook right now, right? So we're all putting in our little propagandas and seeing which will have the most likes. Okay, so one of the things that really bothers me is, so for example, this image. This is a stereograph that was sold as souvenirs, remembrance, from the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. These are supposed to be forms of entertainment, right? So here you can see how a form of entertainment goes into your consciousness. So this is the Philippine Village at the St. Louis World's Fair. And what basically happens is that these are human zoos. So they brought in subjects from American colonies, European colonies, and they put them in these little villages, and they were made to dress in their traditional clothing. So if you've ever been to St. Louis in the middle of winter in February, this is criminal. It's a criminal act to put them in these villages and made to, act out whatever, their indigenousness. Right? So this is another way of like controlling that gaze, making representation and having you lord over these colonial subjects. So here's another one. So that's what they're wearing in the middle of February. And then these images are contrasted with what Americans called progress. And this is called the white city. I mean, it's actually called the white city. So when you are contrasting these images of progress, going forward into the future, the white city versus the human zoo, so these are like everyday people going to the World's Fair to be entertained. And their form of entertainment is being fed this kind of meaning and consciousness about other people, and versus, the us and them is basically very much practiced and reified. Okay. I'm almost getting to my pieces. I'm sorry. Yeah, and then I'll just like go through it. It always happens. I have to like give you a background. Okay, and then sometimes I talk too fast too, so you have to slow me down. So I got into photography while I was at UNM. And one of the things that was very much planted into me is this whole myth of photographic truth. So for example, this is an image taken in 1838 by Louis Daguerre of the Boulevard du Temple. It's at 6 a.m. or 7, I forget, a.m. in the morning. And if you could see on the left image, the streets are empty, right? So it's 7 o'clock at the Boulevard du Temple in Paris. But the only thing the image captures by Daguerre is this lone person. I'm hovering over it. I don't think my mouse is going. Because this person is getting his shoe shined. And this is like a 6-minute exposure. He stood still long enough for the camera to capture him, except that it doesn't capture the whole street of Paris, which at 7 a.m. in the morning, if you've ever been to Paris, and also at this time, is super, super busy. So photographs are like one of those things in the 19th century that pseudoscientists and government workers and also scientists like Louis Agassiz use to justify, certain things, because they said, oh, it's a photograph, it's a mechanical machine, it's objective. No, it ain't. It's not objective, because we could see how that myth of photographic truth is busted and destroyed with just this simple image of a street not capturing the true reality of what's happening on that busy street, right? It's just capturing this guy. And also, I like to tell my students that as a photographer, you're an image maker, which basically puts you in that role of myth maker, right? So you're making images, you're a cultural worker, you are putting your input into society. So you have agency and you're making all kinds of meaning, right? I try to really get that into them. So the image on the right really basically shows that, where there's like this white presenting male being the helm, the father figure of these colonial children subjects below him. So we like to look at all kinds of composition making to do that. So we talk about the gaze and also the criminalization of the Black male body, which is an inheritance from the antebellum period. So here we have an image of an actual ad taken out in New York of a runaway Negro. And so this whole idea of the Black male body as a criminal comes from the antebellum period, because a slave doesn't own his or her own body. So when he runs away, he's basically stealing himself, right? Because he doesn't own himself. And so we talk about how this kind of legacy, that criminalization of the Black male body as a criminal, is then, portrayed, like, for example, this image of O.J. Simpson, who is a Heisman Trophy winner. He becomes darker, right, in the Time magazine image, because darker means like more criminal, which goes back to this kind of imagery right here, which brings us to, jogging while you're Black. And this is what's happening right now with Ahmaud Arbery. It's this idea of the Black male body as a criminal running away, which unfortunately, we are still practicing to this day with this very horrific death of this young man. And the gaze and the hypersexualization of the Black female body. So this is actually from an economic book. It's a Black woman on a shell that is coming to the Americas. So here we have the Black woman portrayed as a licentious, very sexual being. So this is an image of a Black woman in the Middle Passage. This is an image of the Middle Passage, a Black woman being brought to the Americas, but she's being portrayed as this very sexual being, which justifies that whole idea of colonialism and breeding Black women to produce more property, more slaves, right, for the colonies, basically. And then the late and early 20th century, all the violence against Asians, portraying them as this yellow peril, which we saw again. I can't believe we never learned, right? With the violence that was happening during the pandemic against Asians, because it's craziness, right? So I love this sign by this woman that says Asian is not a virus, racism is, because racism is one of those consciousness that we keep practicing, right? The idea that there's a yellow peril, that Chinese people brought it over to the United States. Racism is something that we inherit from our parents, from our friends, from our schools, from our institutions, and we keep practicing it over and over again. So like a virus, if you do not replicate it, it stops. But we just keep replicating it because we never learn. Okay, so which brings me to almost my thesis, and then we go through modernism. And so I like to tell my students that without colonialism, there would be no modern art. There's no Picasso, there's no Matisse, there's no Gauguin, because they went to the anthropology museums in Paris, or Gauguin just left his whole family and went to Tahiti and basically, appropriated the styles from Africa and Tahiti, and now they're world famous. So, which brings me to my work. I'm gonna go through, oh my God, 4 minutes. Okay, I'm so sorry. So all of this is, I looked at the idea of the gaze, and this is a 1 hour exposure that I did with a oh my gosh, pinhole camera. So I made these giant pinholes and I tried to create these stereographic images. And I'm very much interested in creating architectonic sculptures that people can walk around so they're self-aware. Okay, so I'm thinking about that idea of self and creating other. So I'll go through this. And so this one is based off of the train stations. This is a modular sculpture that I set up in three airports and LA Union Station the first time. And on the walls are the meeting of the railroads in Utah. And these are giant tintype images of the buffaloes. And inside it also, but this is a maquette of it, is a hologram of one of my canoe maquettes. And so what I wanted to look at with this piece is the idea of progress again and manifest destiny, and how progress is measured by images like this that looks really happy. Oh, look, we built a railroad. But really, in that building of the railroad, these are the images that are not prominent, right? So images contrast with each other and also strengthen each other. So this image is very powerful in its propaganda and advertisement in terms of exclaiming progress for the United States. But what's really happening is a bunch of bisons died along the way. So that's bison bones that was just wasted, you know, when the railroad came through and people were just joyriding, killing bisons along the way, which is an important animal to a lot of native cultures, and also the Chinese laborers that built the railroad. And then more colonialism. One of my recent projects that I'm working on right now is called No Me Tangere, which basically means touch me not, or don't tread on me. So this is, I started this because my father died 8 years ago and it really broke my heart. And so I wanted to do a documentary about him. He did comic books in the Philippines. So these jeepneys are covered with images from the comic books that my father started when he was 18 years old. So I went to the Philippines and found a lot of these comics, and I made them the material for these jeepneys. And these jeepneys are jeeps left behind during World War II by the Americans. And then what the Filipinos did is they adapted them into public transportation. And now the image on the left are the current incarnations of jeepneys now. They make them and they're super awesome. You go to different regions in the Philippines and then you see the different styles that are happening. And so I love how when a culture comes into another culture, there's adaptation, there's all kinds of exchanges, you know, and things happen. Okay, so I'm done. I'm sorry. I didn't even get to the rest of my work, but you could look at my website. Any questions? I think I only showed you 2 pieces, but basically this project, it's still ongoing. And so this is a film still from the documentary. The pandemic, I was supposed to go to the Philippines, stop that. So I still have to film a whole bunch. And my cousins helped me with this project. So this is one of my cousins, and she is dressed as the Virgin of Antipolo, which is the Mary incarnation of the iteration of the Virgin Mary as the Mary of travelers, because the Filipinos are in a giant diaspora, and so they pray to this Mary if you're Catholic, you know, for your safe travels, basically. So it came through the Manila Galleon via Mexico, via Spain during colonial times. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Eloise.
Yeah, I know it was a lot.
I know. It's exciting to hear how you think through and your research practice and how you bring your teaching practice into, it's like the philosophies are the same no matter what you're going towards. And so I really appreciate that. But if anyone has any questions to type in the chat, so far I don't see any. So now's the time. So from Marley asks, do you only use film when you use digital, or do you only use film, or do you use digital as well?
Yeah, so right now I'm using film. My current project is actually at different, like right now I'm doing a residency with the Denver Botanic Garden. So I'm going into, they have like 4 different sites in Colorado. So I'm doing infrared photography with film because I wanted to capture the heat given off by plant life and also birds. But so this one, for example, this Border Maria series, this is film and it's 10 stop neutral density filter. And but the documentary, it's film. I'm sorry, not film, it's digital. I'm sorry. Yeah. So yeah, the documentary I'm doing in the Philippines, it's digital. But I like film because I hate looking at the monitor. I don't like anything to do with computers. Yeah, that's the thing with me. I like to be outside a lot, and I like to use my hands, and I like to get into the zone inside the dark room.
Thank you. So when you're making your material choices, could you speak a little on your, like how it goes from, the thought to the material choice, like what guides that, the decision-making process?
Yeah, so I'm very much interested in material culture, and I like to look at material as having meaning brought in from the culture itself. Like, for example, the piña cloth. I wanted that idea that, Filipinos hold dear to them, that piña cloth is like the national cloth, but really it's from South America. Who are we kidding? We're always bringing like all these layers of meaning into different things. And also I wanted to look at materials that won't last forever, like the pyramids. I'm not building memorials to the gods. I'm just trying to deal through the problems that I'm encountering now, and yeah, trying to work through that process of being human.
Thank you. And we have a question from Heather Palmer. What advice would you give someone wanting to get into using film?
So I don't quite understand that. Can you elaborate on that? Like how you should you take a class, or is that what you're asking, or how should you approach it? Or because it's like, yeah, there's a lot of different interpretations I'm getting from that.
Yeah, Heather, if you wanna open your mic and elaborate. I'm thinking like that now, people have, I grew up with film and so transitioned to digital, but if you were born a few years later, then you've probably gone the other way and it's this thing. So hello, Heather.
Hi. Yeah, I meant like, how do you get into using it? Because I've only done digital and I know how to use like Adobe and stuff, but it'd be cool to know how you would recommend it to someone that hasn't really grown up with it.
Yeah, so what I would suggest is actually taking a class, because you'll find that there's a lot involved. So more and more when my beginning students, they just take film for the first time, they hold their camera away, right? Because they're used to their iPhones. So you can't focus if you're not looking through the viewer, of a camera. So they realize what I like about film and manual cameras is that you are so very conscious of yourself as the controller, as the image maker, as the person that is very subjective in composing an image. Yeah. So, and also if you know someone with a dark room that will, show you how it works. I don't know. I mean, does PAFA, does it have do you guys have a dark room? Because I know a lot of schools shut down their dark rooms, unfortunately. Is it all digital? Ah, okay. Yeah. And then all that Photoshop stuff that you do, it takes you have to multiply it by pi if you want to get something that's the darkroom equivalent of what you would normally do in 1 second in Photoshop. So, I mean, it really, really shows you how, as a human, you're really manipulating that image because you're going in slower speed. Yeah, but I'm sure. Are you in Pennsylvania? Are you in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. Yeah, it's a huge city. I'm sure there's dark room co-ops over there. Yeah, and it's also a great community, I think. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both. Yeah, it's fun to think about going that direction. I struggle with Photoshop because I go the other, because I'm wanting to touch it. Marley has a great question. Wanting to use more materials that are ephemeral. Do you struggle using film since the materials are wasteful and toxic?
Yes, they are. I struggle with it all the time. So the practices that we have with my students involve a lot with water, also because we live in California. So so that's one of those things that I think about all the time, especially with the current project that I'm doing now with infrared. So that's something definitely that I take into consideration. So when I go out into shoots, I try really, really hard not to use so much film, so I'm really, really looking at my composition and relying heavily on my knowledge of light conditions, but I mean, that's something definitely that I'm very much complicit in, and I know that. That's a great question. Yeah, you gotta walk the walk if you're gonna talk the talk, right?
Yeah, also part of being human,
Yeah.
Like what it ends up being worth. So Amy Lee Ketchum, I see you're here, not to put you on the spot, but we still have a couple minutes. You're in Philadelphia, I know you're our new animation instructor. If you have any
Yeah, I put on my camera because I wanted to tell you how much I appreciate this talk. It's my first artist lecture I've been able to see this whole year because of what's happening. And I just, as an educator, and an artist, I just really wanted to tell you how much I appreciate you sharing just your teaching philosophy. And it just seems really apparent how important teaching is part of art making. And, some of the things that you want to express to your students, it's the same thing you're trying to express in your artwork. And I think there's so much ego in the art world that people tend to not focus so much on their work as an educator. I also really appreciate how much the history that you shared with us in your artist talk, because again, I feel like so many artist talks are about this is my work and this is about this, and it's heroizing the artist rather than the issues. And I just really sense the sincerity of your work.
Yeah, thanks for that, Amy. Yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, in the art world, it's hero worshiping. And yeah, I'm not into that. Yeah, at all. Yeah, that whole machismo we inherited. So thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, actually, right before this talk, I was, because I'm absent from my class today, I'm having my students look at this short documentary, which I also want to kind of promote to everyone. It's just a KCET documentary on Manzanar. It's short, it's 20 minutes long. And basically this guy looks at the way that Ansel Adams and Dorothea Lange captured Manzanar, which is, one of those concentration camps for Japanese citizens. And also the way that photography cameras were hidden inside the camps, so that the detainees, the incarcerated people, were able to photograph their daily lives. And it's interesting to see how Ansel Adams, his point of view versus Dorothea Lange versus the incarcerated, took photos of everyday life. And yeah, I highly suggest everyone look at it.
Absolutely, I will. Like being in Huntsville, Alabama, it's like we're a city born from the Operation Paperclip, and the there's evidence of everywhere we look. There's evidence of how those situations even I don't know, brought my family together, and even me, because like my dad came from by way of that. My mother was here, so it's like acknowledging and navigate. I can't wait to see that. That's going to be fascinating. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Eloisa, and everyone that asked questions and showed up for this. It's an amazing presentation, and let's see. We hope everyone enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you again on December 1st for a lecture by Catalina Oyang. And have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. And that is it. I will stop recording.
Thank you. Bye.